All right, so we are joined for our final guest of this series with our seniors here at Velma Jackson High School. My friend, Dr. Jade Singleton, all the way from Washington, D.C., founder of IKONI Collective, creator of the documentary 92, The Silent Revolt, No One Saw Coming, published author, speaker, podcaster, just a resume that I will put up against anybody. So thank you so much for taking some time for us today to have this very important conversation.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me, Mr. Pago. Thank you.
I get. Everybody says it
Hi,
wrong. It's
get
fine.
Pigo is
I,
French.
Definitely. Not a whole lot of French folks here in Mississippi. Now, obviously, we want to talk about your platform and obviously the documentary and your company and some of the things that these kids need to be ready for. But I think it's important to give a little background because your degrees are fantastic. University of Richmond, Gonzaga University, and you spent a lot of time working in corporate America in
Yeah.
investment banking. So, talk
Yeah.
about that journey, kind of your adjustment to college,
Yeah.
and what led you to make that pivot from corporate America to working with inclusion uh,
Yeah.
after being in finance.
Yeah. I had a very non-traditional path. Started college, then stopped, and then went back again in my 20s. And I kind of fell into finance, fell into banking, stayed there working in asset management. But what I discovered was I was really good at, well, what others discovered was that I was really good at teams and thinking about team performance and team communications. And so I was consistently kind of pulled out of those roles to help executives in other ways, like with communicating out tough messages. From there, I went on to advise at NASA with the NASA missions teams, which was very interesting. I did that for a couple of years, and then on to the United Nations, and again, really focused on these difficult conversations. What ultimately makes teams run well? What makes them struggle? And doing the coding for all of that. And then I went back and got my doctorate in education where I focused on gaslighting and gaslighting behaviors in corporate environments. And so I think for a lot of it for me was an interest, right? What I was most interested in, which was people. And sometimes I think those around us can pick that up, what we're good at, what we're skilled at before we can.
Yeah, and it's so important because you have such a big platform on inclusion, and what I was just talking about with them before you got here was, you see so many things about, you hear so many people say, well, it needs to be based on merit. They need to get this job based on merit, and I agree 100%. But then you look at the news just this past week. Dr. Erica Schwartz appointed first black woman to ever be appointed the head of the CDC. Unbelievable resume. I mean, she's got a Juris Doctorate, she's got a MD, served our country in the military, all types of experience. And the first thing you see on these posts is DEI hire, not qualified. And I'm just like, what else does she have to do? We just had a black man fly around the moon. And all you see is why are they just putting DEI hires in there? I'm like, you earn it, they earn it, and people are still giving these vibes, and it is just so heartbreaking and unfair to see. And I was telling these kids, look, they're 17, 18 years old. They've lived in a sheltered environment, and it's not their fault. You're a product of your environment. You can't help where you're born. And they want to go to these big schools. I know you went to University of Richmond, kind of big school, but in a big city. They're going to be in a new environment. And people are going to judge them based on the color of their skin and where they're from. And it's not fair. It's not right, but everybody knows it's true. And I don't say that to scare them. I say it to prepare them because you talk about corporate gaslighting. A lot of times it may be subconscious. Maybe that person doesn't have evil in their heart, but if they have never been exposed to that, they're not going to know how to handle somebody different being in their environment.
Absolutely. And I think that these things go all the way, they go all the way back. Um, What I would say is that some people are used to very specific social roles for certain groups. Black women are supposed to be in this social role, Black men are supposed to be in this social role. And what happens when they see you outside of that social role is called expectation violation. There's a
There
whole
you
theory
go.
around this, right?
Yes.
So when I see someone, like if the only time I've ever been around people, from Colombia, let's say, was when they were in subordinate positions or cleaning up or something. And that's the only kind of way that I've seen them. When a doctor comes in that is Colombian, there can be that feeling of, wait, they're in the wrong social role, right? If you haven't expanded yourself, and that's really what happens. A lot of the time, some of these people that believe this way, they're so insulated. It's really sad. I mean, I where I grew up, it was, people from every nation. So when I went to school in Northern Virginia, I went to a high school where literally like I was in school with Somali children. I was in school with Greek children, everywhere you could think of in the world. And so what I had to learn was there are people who have had no exposure, and you might be shocked by that, like that they think that limited. And that's their problem, you know? And also think of it as a strategic advantage. They're slower. That means you have a more myopic view. See it as an advantage. Okay, so you think this, you have that small social role. That means you're behind. That means you're going to be slower to innovate. That means you're going to be slower to execute because you're stuck in this very slow, stupid, really. It's just dumb mindset where you can't open up your aperture. So the thing is not getting stuck there with those folks and being able to move on, find those allies, that are going to be able to look at you on your merits, so that you're able to move through.
And then, and that's such a great point. And we'll talk about, why they need to find their tribes when they go to college, find their groups. And besides just the educational and professional benefit of that, it's a mental thing as well. But something I was telling them, and this is again, this is not an opinion. This is something I saw with my own eyes. I had a job at a certain place, and we had a black woman there that was a little bit older than everybody. She did more work than anybody there. She was dependent on for so many things. She just came to work and did an amazing job. Did took care, I mean, her job description was insane. But one day, all of these salaries started coming out, and it was all public. And I saw how much she was being paid as compared to white people, men and women, doing similar jobs, and it was unbelievable the disparity of pay. That's not an opinion. That's not hearsay. It was in black and white.
Yeah.
And the only difference was she didn't have some of the advanced degrees they had. But still, that's not an excuse for black women or black people in general to be marginalized in a workplace when they're being asked to do the exact same thing and not getting paid. And it was less than 50%. I mean, I don't
Yeah,
remember the exact number, but it was
that's sad.
mind-boggling the way. And
Hmm.
again, she was from a rural, she drove a long way, come from a small
Hmm.
town, rural area, and she was just totally, programmed to say, I'm just going to fall in line and do what they say. I have a job.
Yeah,
And
because you're
yeah,
punished. So they've done a lot of study. I think it was Stanford that did a study on this, where when Black people ask for an increase in pay, depending upon the individual's bias, that can be taken in terrible ways where they actually inflate the number you asked for. So if I ask for 3,000 as a Black woman, if you have high rates of bias and you believe that I should be in a kitchen somewhere scrubbing away and that's the only thing I'm good for, you may hear $30,000, right? So when they come back and they report this, it's a skewed thing. Who the heck can figure that out? You don't have that kind of time to figure out whether a person has bias or a person doesn't have bias and whether or not I can ask. So she's likely been punished. So the coaching that you receive as Black people is always wrong. I haven't seen it done well, where they're telling you, hey, push past the imposter syndrome and make sure that your confidence is a certain level. It doesn't matter if your confidence level is a certain way. It doesn't matter if you do have a million degrees. Women that are in cohorts that I've been in are some of the most educated women I know, and we still earn the same amount as we did in the 1940s. The pay equity gap for Black people has not changed since the 1940s. The thing is, what has changed is your ability and the opportunity to either start doing small business, looking at different ways of innovating to build different types of streams of income. And so I think the real big kind of ta-da here is just that we anticipate, we're sold that, you go to school, you get all these degrees. I have two master's degrees and a doctorate. And then you're going to make, tons of money and you're going to be seen on your merits. And that's just not the case when you look at it from a macro perspective. People who are able to really make it to where it is that they thought that they would go are super independent and they've developed their own networks outside of whatever the conglomerate is that they're working for. Because as you can see, those things can be taken away at any point in time. Any incentives to get you in there can be taken away any point in time. Any changes to your pay can be made at any point in time. And you're always the first to get laid off. And those are studies. That's not just me talking. You're the
I agree.
first pushed in and then the very first pushed out. And so if you know that and you're going in that's not, at a certain point, you're not angry about it anymore. It's just is what it is. So how do I come up with a strategy to navigate through college, to find a field where I could be more of myself? For me, investment banking worked because,
Yeah.
we're talking dollars and cents. It's very clear to kind of see where I stand. And also the people were very direct, right? And so if I was direct, I didn't have to worry about that. There was an expectation. So kind of finding out where your personality is and where those cohorts might be that lean more toward equity, just how they're based, right, can make a huge difference.
Yeah, and you talk about I'm glad you mentioned the growth of small business because before you came on, I even asked the rhetorical question. I was like, why do you think we've had such a astronomical growth of black women-owned businesses in this country, especially around here? I mean, I've got tons of them on this platform, and they couldn't really think of. And look, I said, look, you're 17, 18 years old. You still don't know a lot of things, but that is because there has been real issues in the workplace. Now, and I definitely said this. There's plenty of times that young people do things to disqualify themselves, and we've had that conversation as well. If you're having, you doing bad interviews, you're showing up late, and you're not putting your best foot forward, I don't care who you are, you're not going to last long. But at the end of the day, it really is a two-way street. People aren't doing their part for people that do right, and that's why we're seeing more and more black women opening businesses and becoming so successful.
Yeah. And I think that it's one of the things that I would encourage for the next generation to do is when you're starting your small businesses, getting involved with the collective. So there's women like, if you have time, look up the Bow Collective. Those are the top 1% Black women business owners in the United States. You have the Black Executive Men's Group. Those brothers have a lot to offer. And it's easy, as far as connecting with someone. Because one of the things that we'll see is like you'll start your business and then the sister next door starts a business, the one next door starts a business. There's opportunities to pool your resources. And this is what we see Black farmers do. I work a lot with Black investments and credit unions that are in rural areas of Virginia. And one of the beautiful things was they think like a cooperative. They think about their insurance as a cooperative because they had to. They think about their credit union institutions for Black farmers like a cooperative. If you don't have a combine, I have a combine. Well, three of us have a combine. So why do we all need to buy combines, right? If we're only, having to leverage them at a certain point during the season. That is what has kept that particular part of um, uh, I think part of our infrastructure so solid and sound is how Black farmers do it. And I think that for those of us that are in more urban areas, we need to do the same, right? Pool resources. You got a marketing company. I have I don't know, a training company of some sort for executive leadership. How can we kind of bridge and maybe build a conglomerate together?
Yeah, and I'm so glad you mentioned collective because I wanted to talk about your collective, IKONI Collective, which has done so good in building networking with black women in business. And we talk about, obviously these kids aren't thinking about, when I get out of college, but while they're in college, find a collective,
Oh my
join
gosh,
a
yes.
professional organization. We have a few going to Mississippi State. They have a
Yes.
great chapter of the National Society of Black Engineers. where they
Yes.
can, have those shared experiences, really network within the field. And I told them no matter where you go, join the Black Student Union, join,
Yeah.
a lot of great MPAC organizations, getting involved in things like that. And again, even if you don't want to be the MPAC thing, join something
Yeah.
to get your name out there anyway. But
Yes.
also, the mental health aspect of that will be so
Yes.
useful to have people with shared experiences, shared
Yes.
backgrounds, and shared
Yes.
goals.
I can tell you. I was at a I advised at a PWI, very big name PWI. Like if I said it, people are like, wow, it's an Ivy, the best of the best, supposedly. And they had brought in people from students from the best of the best, HBCU. There was like some medical training that they were doing together, and they wanted to share resources. So these were all, the smartest of the smart coming together. Um, in their pursuit of being doctors. And my job was to really talk because there were issues that were going on when these HBCU brilliant students were coming in to this PWI that shocked me, like literally shocked me. And one of them was the constantly hearing that Black people don't feel the same as far as pain is concerned, right? Which is
What?
very, yeah, it's a big problem
Wow.
in the medical community, and that we have different nerve endings. And so having to sit through conversations like that, when you are going to be a medical doctor, and the concern that I was hearing, the fear, right? Because if I'm sitting next to someone that's being trained to be a doctor and they believe that Black people don't feel pain the same way, that keeps you up at night. That worries you to bits. And so some of what I was seeing was not just them standing up and saying, like, someone needs to say something. The professor should have corrected this. This shouldn't be in the book. It's documented. So you have to take into account the toll that it takes on you to correct those types of things, right? It's not a one and done thing you can forget about. You're up at night. You're thinking, are they gonna, how are they tending to those Black patients? And so what I would say is when you're moving into these situations and these types of things catch you off guard and you're surprised by them, realizing, you know, you can do something about it, but also understanding on the other side of that there is a toll, there is a mental health kind of toll, and make sure that you're taking care of you.
Yeah, and something I always say, and Mississippi does a great job. Everywhere, all these colleges, they have free mental health services. And even my white friends with Black kids they've adopted have said the importance of finding a Black therapist. And it's not the same that the white therapist wouldn't do a great job, but the level of understanding and the mental health fatigue would not be as big dealing with a therapist that looks like you. And all these places do a great job of doing that. And I said, look, first of all, you've already paid for it, what the expensive his college is now. But it's not going to cost you a dime. Go in there and talk to them about it. If you're facing this stuff, talk through it. Join these groups. And IKONI Collective that you started, you guys have done such a great job of bringing successful women together to talk about these issues, to give them a mental break. So just talk about what IKONI Collective is
Oh,
and why
sure.
it's really done such a great job to help with these mental health stressors that women are facing.
Yeah, absolutely. So IKONI Collective started very small. Now we're about 5,000 of us. And
Wow.
it's Black women mostly, but also people who support Black women, right? So I would say that one of our biggest contributors are Black men who never want the spotlight at all, but that's where a lot of our money comes from. That's where a lot of our abilities to convene come from. Um, and what we wanted to focus on was just what I was saying earlier, which is being able to reach somebody when you do have those moments as they're happening, right? So we work with women who are going through it as far as making transitions within their workplace, or even feeling like they're being gaslighted in some way, or they're isolated. So a lot of these women are the only one, right? They're the highest ranking Black, you name it, and they need a community around them to kind of bounce ideas off of, bounce business ideas off of, but also to check in and see, am I hearing this correctly? Do you think I'm overreacting? Because there's a lot of work trauma there.
You're muted.
Sorry. Yeah, I was just
That's
saying
fine.
there's a lot of work trauma that folks have to work through. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's so cool, and we'll definitely share that information for Connie before we get done. But it's so cool because all of this, all these things led you to make a documentary film. Uh, 92, the Silent Revolt, that no one saw coming. And look, me and you were close to the same age. I won't reveal our age. But I told these kids again before you came on. I said, look. I've heard politician after politician after politician promise things and nothing has happened. So no matter what would have happened, this is something that needed to happen anyway.
Hmm.
Because we have in this, and I tell them, look, I don't say things just to say it. They need to know how intelligent and gifted they are. They need to have confidence. But at the end of the day, they've got to look out for themselves. So talk about the film, what the inspiration was, and kind of what the message of the film is.
Yeah, so absolutely. So 92 is a documentary, as you mentioned, and it's follows women that have decided that they want to look at labor in America differently, that they no longer want to participate in what's been sold to them. So these are women that have been in very high-ranking positions in dream jobs, like you could say, like head of Nike, Global, and head of Mahogany, Hallmark, like big positions, who've realized that, the mental health toll wasn't worth it and that they needed to walk away, that they needed to make some sort of adjustment or change. One of the women that we feature, Dr. Tina Session, moved to Rwanda. Another one has moved to Mexico and started their own things. And for those that stayed, they have figured out how to work in a way that does not compete with their mental health and ultimately being whole. And so we wanted to show this to say there really has been this movement among Black women. And I always say I think Black men were probably about, if I had to estimate, it would be about 10 years out ahead of us in recognizing and realizing um, if things don't change, if you can't do a big overhaul of any system, and we're not seeing forward momentum, like I said, since the 1940s, no matter what you do, well, I have to start doing something else. I have to do something different. And that's what we're seeing a lot of pe folks in our community doing. And some of it is like relearning. So my grandmother was from Mississippi and moved
Oh, cool.
to yeah, during the Great, I have a whole family, like she had, let me see, 14 brothers and sisters from Mississippi,
Wow.
from Greenville, Mississippi, and they've
I was born
all
in Greenville, Mississippi. That's awesome.
yeah. Yeah. So, they moved in the Great Migration and moved to
Yeah.
New York, moved to Chicago, moved to St. Louis, etc. But there were a lot of things that, looking back, having stayed, if you would have stayed, I mean, there was land that was owned, there was ways of being, ways of community that we're actually trying to relearn now. Because when you get out there, it can be very isolating. You find that you miss community and that you have to do it in a different way, in a very intentional type of way. And when I go into, like, I work in a small rural place called Halifax County, they still have their community intact. There's still that feeling of helping the neighbor, right? And so you don't want to lose that if you can avoid it, because when you don't have that to go back to after a day working in some of these institutions, it can be difficult.
Yeah, and they've handed me some really good questions. And also a big part of this, and all of these kids are old enough to vote, every single one of them. And if they're not already, they will be in a few months. So before we ever have a presidential election, we've got a state election in Mississippi in 2027. And I've said this 1,000 times, and I stand by this. I believe my role as a teacher in a public school, it is not my job to tell anybody who to vote for in any election. I tell kids all the time, you find out what's important to you, but you better be in there voting for somebody because voter apathy is a nationwide pandemic because and I've had kids, I'll never forget this. I had a kid tell me once, when I was living in Tennessee, there was a very important local election. And this girl said, well, I'm going to wait until the presidential election. And I said, you need to vote in that election but you need to vote in this one too. If you have the right to vote, you need to go in there and exercise it. You know, a big hero of mine is Medgar Evers. He was murdered in his front yard in Jackson for people to have the right to vote. And this wasn't that long ago. His wife is still around. His daughter is still very prominent in the community. So
Yeah.
this was in my parents' lifetime that this happened. And then we have a local election in Flowood where I live. 187 people was it that voted in a city council election. But then you want to complain about things going on. And that's always been my issue is look, I vote every time. Sometimes my person wins, sometimes they don't. But at the end of the day, I'm in there exercising that right that people in other countries don't have and that people in this country did not have for a long time. So, and I've even told them, if you want to go away to school, that's fine. But you can still find a way to vote in your elections that affect where you are from. So, just talk about why it is so important to be engaged in the democratic process. Not just the presidential election gets all the
Yeah.
pub, but these state and county elections
Oh, they're
affect
so
your life
meaningful.
so
They're
much.
so, yeah, they do. And I would say state and local elections are just as important as national elections because your state and local elections, I don't know. For me, anyway, in Virginia, I feel like it's the impacts you can see much more clearly. So we have a governor, Abigail Spanberger, who elected to tax some of these staunchly and I mean outright racist
Oh yeah.
organizations that hadn't been taxed before, right? That brings more money in, that brings in revenue, from folks who are, on the different side of the aisle. She's not saying you can't do that. She's not saying you can't worship the Confederacy. She's not saying any of that. What she is saying is that it's so polarizing and it's so exclusionary that we don't feel like I should be paying tax. I should
Oh
not
yeah.
have to be absorbing those taxes, right?
Oh, I'm with you.
So for a lot of people, that was a big issue. Um, but but who's going to activate that, right? If the other side won, it would have been completely different. So we had to make our voices heard on these elements to have that change happen, or else it would have never happened. So it's about where your money goes. It's about where your resources go in a very real way.
Yeah, and and even small things like the roads you're driving on, the taxes for businesses. We talked about small business. How small businesses are affected in the community can depend on who's in the city council seat. And in the water you drink, even that's some of the civic stuff. But we got some important state laws that are about to be on the books. And if you're not voting, you don't have a right to complain about it. And I just encourage everybody again, vote for who your heart feels best serves your interest, but you need to be voting for someone. And I've even had I think it's funny. I've even had politicians that some of the older crowd that have been like, look, if you don't like the job I'm doing, vote me out. Because at the end of the day, it's about if I'm serving your community. And before I get to their questions, I'll tell this quick story that he said. One of the great Mississippi politicians is Jim Kitchens, he lost his reelection bid, but he's in his 80s, and he said, "I'm done." But he's the one who said that. But he also said, when the Voting Rights Act first passed in 1965, where he lived in Mississippi, the Chancery clerk would always say he was closed. So he would only register people to vote that he wanted to vote. And he told our young people, you need to remember that because there were people your age trying to vote that weren't allowed to. And they never had a say in what happened in their community. And I still get chills thinking about it. And he wanted them to understand that it hasn't you haven't always had that opportunity, and you need to exercise it every single time.
Absolutely.
Well, I do have a few questions here.
Sure.
And again, like I said, this isn't a fun or comfortable conversation, but it's something that needs to be had. And I'm glad they're thinking about this. But I love this question. This is Kiana May. She's going to go to Alcorn State University,
All
great
right.
HBCU here in Mississippi, and be in the band. Um, and she asked, "What role do you think a community can play in healing and resilience of the Black community?"
I think that the healing and resilience needs to be I think that the biggest role I can do is kind of what I'm doing around looking at remembering. So how did communities work and function when they were majorly oppressed? There can be a tendency to run away from all those things very quickly, right? Because they were so horrifying. But there were also gems there, right? When we look at the schools that were built at that time and what they produced, I mean, these little tiny schoolhouses, the excellence that came out of them, those are lessons that we can deploy today. So I think a lot of it has to do with not necessarily reinvention, but just remembering. There's a big picture. My husband and I share an office that we have of Mound Bayou, men standing out in front of the store in Mound Bayou,
Yeah,
looking
in
just
Mississippi.
beautiful and regal, and but also like don't play. You could come around here if you want to, but what they were able to produce was so valuable. A place where civil rights leaders could come and literally rest, right? Because they had that. They had the defense, but they also had that sense of community, and everyone had a role to play that was very specific. Those are the things that we just need to remember.
Big time. Now she has a second part of this question, and this man, this is deep. She asked, "Where do you think is the biggest gap in support? Would it be healthcare, education, the workplace, or somewhere else?"
I would say it's all of them equally, right? Because workplace is going to feed into healthcare in certain ways. If you're able to get your, insurance, whatever it is, so it's going to play a role, and they're all interconnected. I think that the biggest gaps, though, that exist is holding folks accountable, right, for the inequities that exist. I don't think it can just be enough to tell, like, to let politicians just do what they want, to let medical directors just do what they want. If you're seeing, Black women dying at a 5 times rate, regardless of her background, her health status, or her education, none of those matter. In some cases, it's worse. So the more you have, the worse it is for you. Those people need to be held to account. And I think that the more that that's done, the more we'll start to see some of these gaps that are, based in the infrastructure close.
Love it. This is Morgan Thompson. She's our Miss Velma Jackson, going to play college basketball at Northwest Mississippi Community College next year.
Awesome.
And she's got, again, great question. She asked, "What's something that you've had to unlearn in order to grow into who you are now?"
I think one thing that I had to unlearn was having an attitude of uh, almost an elitist type of attitude around certain things. Feeling as if, because I had done these check marks, that I should be in certain positions, and that meant that looked a certain way, or it felt a certain way, or it sounded a certain way. And what I've had to unlearn that mindset and realize that a lot of what was looking for or seeking was already there the entire time, right? It was a matter of me just needing to cultivate where I am. And I think, that's something that I had to go out there and find out the hard way.
Oh, I think all of us at the end of the day have to unlearn something that we had earlier in our life. I know I definitely have. And she has a second part of question, and this is, man, this is good. She asked, "What parts of yourself have you most had to protect, and what parts are you finally allowing to be seen?"
I would say the part of myself that I really had to protect was wanting to consistently help and wanting to consistently advocate. And we see that a lot with Black women, where you really are primed to help and to kind of go out ahead and to do all of these things. So I wanted to protect that. I wanted to maintain that integrity because that's how my heart is. But I like the word protect because you do have to set some boundaries around that, because you can also deplete yourself in a major way. And I can't remember what the second part was. What parts do I need to protect and what
What
part?
parts of yourself are you finally allowing to be seen?
And finally, now to be seen, I think being direct, being frank, asking for what it is that you believe that you're worth. And that's the interesting thing about worth. And someone told me this, and I thought it was brilliant. Um, a woman that makes a ton of money, like way more money than I make. And she said, what uh you don't get what you rate typically. You get what you demand, right? Like no one is going to kind of walk by and hand you the equity. You're going to have to demand it and have that expectation. And so figuring out what is that cost for my time? What does that cost monetarily, right? Because we all have containers, if you think about it. If you think about the number in your mind right now, if we're talking about money that you think that you should have, that number can stick with us. It's usually, researchers say, a little bit more than what our parents make, around there. And how you expand that container is you expand your demands. And in order to expand your demand, you have to test up against it every time. So making the ask feels uncomfortable, good. That means you're in the right place and that you're growing that container.
Love it. I've got a couple more, and this student didn't want me to say their name, but they are extremely talented, and they have a couple questions, and I love this first one. They ask, how do you go about your day knowing that if you walk in a space, people may say something that's not good about you because they either know what you've done or just based on the way you look?
I would say that it over time, it lessens because you're able to, as you get older, you weed those folks out. They kind of, it kind of dissipates in a sense. Because, like I said, folks with those types of mindsets typically have to sit in very restrictive places. And if you're a creative, you're a thinker, you're not there long. And what I've learned is that getting angry about it doesn't really help. That burns you up, it wastes your cortisol, it makes you distressed. And the worst thing about it is it can make you very resentful. And so I let it roll off of me. But, if it's something egregious, I have stood up. I will stand up anywhere. I don't care. I'll stand up. I've stood up on, trade floors and gotten into it over someone being mistreated. So you have to figure out where are your boundaries. I'm not going to watch anyone be abused. I don't care who it is. I'm not going to, hear certain terms about any group of people or race of people or whatever, disability. I'm not going to stand for it. Those are the things I'm going to make sure that regardless, you're going to get a response from me. And then other things, it's like, whatever. If I have to try to infer it or why you're doing it, let it go. So I think coming up with where do I react? How do I want to respond? And thinking about that before you go in does a lot of service.
Love it. And we'll ask this last question here at the very end here. And we're almost out of time. And we thank you so much for taking some time for us
Thank
today. But a
you.
couple things before we go, and we're going to end with this last question. But just tell everybody where they can find IKONI Collective online.
Yeah,
Great
sure.
content and on the website.
Yes, it's www.ikoni.org.
And that's IKONI,
Yeah.
Akani.org. And it's like I tell these kids all the time. And look, I was a teenager at one point. I like seeing the funny people online. I'm a big sports fan. I like seeing the athletes. But find people like yourself. Find people that can put positive things into your life. So many negative things are put in young kids' mind, especially these young black kids. Things that aren't true, things that aren't going to help them. Find things that are going to elevate you to where you can be. And this last question is what I wanted to ask too. And it is in just a couple of weeks, these kids are going to graduate. They're going to start making decisions. Well, we got a couple that I know going active duty military. We got some going the trade route, some going the 4 year college route, HBCU, PWI, and we support all of them and we're proud of all of them. But what do they need to know that they may not be aware of as they start going into these new places? We're a small community. We're a all black community. People are going to look different. People are going to think different. People are going to have different experiences. So, what do they need to be prepared for mentally that they're going to see? And it is just a matter. It's not a matter of if. It's a matter of when.
Yeah. I think some of the things that are going to be that might be jarring is um, trying to figure out where it is that you fit, right? Coming from a small community, coming from somewhere that has those communal roots, there's different ways of being with folks that might be a bit disorienting, right? But one thing I can tell you that you will find as you go out into the bigger world is that there will always be someone that will take an interest in you. So I don't want you to feel, especially if you're going into some of these larger PWIs, I don't want you to go in with that armor up too thick because more than likely you'll meet people that you'll grow to love for the rest of your life, right? So be prepared, like I was saying, think through where those areas of opportunity might be and how you want to show up, but don't close yourself off. And if folks want to learn, they want to learn about where you come from, they want to learn. I never had a problem. I guess I'm odd because I didn't care. Like when a white friend would ask me something about, whatever hip hop artist at the time, I'm old, so it might be Biggie or something. Jay, what song? It didn't offend me. Some people are offended by that. It didn't offend me. I like sharing my culture. Not to say it's all Biggie Smalls, but you know what I mean? Like little things like that from pop culture, whatever, they might ask because I understand we're trying to learn. We're trying to kind of, share culture, and you can feel kind of where that comes from. So I would say sharing what you know, sharing your culture, sharing about your beautiful community, and being open in that way will get you the right folks because you're authentic and you're different, and you're black and you're beautiful, and you're going to be just fine. You're the tip of the spear.
Love it. Well, again, we thank you so much for joining us. Next time I'm in the DMV, I got to meet you guys. I would love to sit and
Yeah,
talk. But again, we thank you so much for joining us, the founder
thank
of
you.
IKONI Collective, creator of 92, The Silent Revolt, No One Saw Coming, Dr. Jade Singleton. We thank you so much for joining us today.
I'm blessed to be here with y'all, and my best wishes to all of you. I'll be keeping you in my prayers. I know you'll go far. Reach out to me anytime on LinkedIn. I really mean that. So reach out to me. Chat
Awesome. Thank you
soon.
so much. See
Bye
ya.
bye.